Hi everybody, this is Karak with ACG. Today what we're gonna be doing is a walking the walk video for Assassins Creed Syndicate. Now we'll be using the PC footage currently at this time, and what we're gonna do is just look at some of the different visual artistic aspects of the actual title and maybe some of the problems that we see. Now remember, when it comes to these walking the walks, we have enough technical analysis videos out there where people are talking about all the different technical wizardry that goes on in these titles. I'll cover a little bit whenever I see that something is really impacting the game itself, but for the most part, much of this is going to be about the artistic vision and how Ubisoft has continued to try to put out these games and make them feel fresh, make them feel alive, and we're going to go ahead and see if that's worked out. Now, one thing I have to say, I'm always constantly impressed by Ubisoft's ability to deliver a city and make it at least feel somewhat realistic. And I really like the idea of how they're going about the reflection of life. Reflection of life is something that developers have different terms for whatever it may be, but reflection of life is basically how they go about making an open world city look somewhat realistic in the way that its denizens go about their daily lives. One of the cool things about the way Ubisoft does it is they have static events. Now, these are events that basically occur at all times, characters that are there at all times. Then they have a lot of randomized events that occur with those people moving and obeying speed limits and laws and stuff like that in their games, like Watch Dogs. Here, obeying things like, carriages stopping, for a person to cross the road. There's a lot of really cool stuff here. Even here, when we're walking through this area and the characters sweeping, characters that look like a little girl shoveling shit. It's so great that each of the Ubisoft worlds that they put together for these games really does feel unique in some way. And the industrial areas here in this particular game, and Syndicate itself, I feel does a really good job of making you feel that dire, down and out feel of a city that is sort of coming into modernization but hasn't really got there yet. This guy here cleaning this wall, one of the cool things I noticed is that when you see that character in particular, those characters in particular, and there are very few of them, which is also cool that they don't overstay their welcome, but the wall that they'll be working on is always a little bit cleaner and nicer than others. There's an attention to detail that really blows my mind here. We've seen it in games like Fallout 4, especially recently, where you can see a lot of cool little secrets here and there. But even as we're walking by the park with the pigeons, these kids begging, you'll see those kids repeated a couple times in different, different groups and scenarios. But I'm really blown away by their ability to continue to have this varied lifestyle occur with the mix of that static and dynamic people. And this guy here who just got thieved by that kid. Very, very cool right there. Now, a little bit of technical stuff. I have this running at, I think I'm running at 1440p. I'm recording at 1080p for people so they can sort of see an overall rendition of this like they would see on most TVs. One of the things that I think that they've done a really good job, and I have it on in this actual gameplay, which is HBAO uses a depth buffer, and it really increases the accuracy of the effect overall. And Ambient Occlusion is one of those things that makes a 3D representation of a world really pop with different differences in depth. And you'll notice it in older games that don't have ambient occlusion, where it just doesn't feel as depthy. It doesn't feel like things are fully 3D. Easiest way to describe ambient occlusion is on a bright sunny day, throw a 2x4 on the ground. There's that shadow there between the grass and the 2x4. And what happens with ambient occlusion is they go about really accurately mimicking that shadow. You get a world that just feels like it really has a depth to it. Here on the left, you see where those two buildings meet, a darker corner, and then it sort of fades out from there. And it does a really good job of especially making this area, which when we're going from the dark, coming into the light here, sort of pop. And you'll see that in different locations, and I'll try to point it out. But it's used everywhere. It is sort of a frame rate killer. It's much better than screen space ambient occlusion. One of the reasons why it was created was because screen space was so hard on GPUs. But it looks phenomenal. I think they did a really good job, and it allows you to really see distance and feel space between areas. So I really, really dig that. Now here we're coming into one of my favorite areas in the game. It's sort of a thoroughfare. To the left over there is a park, and to the right here we're going to be walking down. We're going to go into the more modernized areas. But I love the mix of the two areas here in London. So I guess now is a good time to talk about the anti-aliasing real quick. The anti-aliasing that I'm using currently in this, and there's a couple different samples types you can use, but I'm using TXAA. Now that's a temporal anti-aliasing. What that does is it gets rid of the scroll that happens in normal anti-aliasing. Sometimes when you turn anti-aliasing on, there's a shimmering. Even though everything looks better, there's a shimmering on some straight lines, sort of a dancing, where the accuracy of the anti-aliasing sort of doesn't keep up. Well, temporal anti-aliasing takes care of most of that. However, it does it at the cost of some blurring that occurs on the textures. So what you can do, it depends on how you want to run your PC game. But with your PC games, you have the ability to use things like Reshade, which is an injector that allows you to basically add some sharpening and adjust the way the game looks, which is really nice if you want to run TXAA and you're not really happy with that blurriness that occurs. Of course, the game offers multiple types of anti-aliasing. One of the problems with this title in particular, however, is that they've merged anti-aliasing types, so you can't pick and choose. If you pick, temporal anti-aliasing, you also get FXAA with it, which is already its own Vaseline filter. And it looks like they've done some changes to FXAA and sharpened it up already in the graphics engine itself, but still it induces some blurriness there. Yeah, this is all just excellent looking. I love how Ubisoft has always done such a really good job of basically showing different classes of people and dress within their different areas. Some games just don't, especially in the past, didn't do that. Now I think we're seeing that a lot. I don't think it's too special to see it here in Syndicate, but it really does just add to the overall feel. The Kappa. I like how I can kidnap him right in front of everybody. That'd be great. Also, I'm blown away by the amount of audio that is occurring here in Syndicate. I was already surprised on the console version. PC version doesn't have any more or anything like that, but it is a little bit easier for me to basically just sit around and listen. I'm not doing a review for this. I was just sort of playing it on my own, enjoying walking around and listening to things. The amount of environmental audio is outstanding here, with hundreds upon hundreds of discussions that characters have and different things that they say. You hear everything from like mob style activities to some really, really risque stuff. And we might hear that in this video. There's some risque comments between men and women that are absolutely impressive. I'm really happy they got in there, because it's just like walking down a really populated city street and some of the strange stuff you're going to end up hearing. Now, as we continue down, I have to say, when it comes down to these games, and most of the time, a game like this just doesn't handle horses and cattle, oxen, anything of four-legged variety very well, including dogs. None of the games really have. However, I have to say, they've done a fairly good job with the horse and carriage. First of all, there's multiple types, which I thought was awesome, and let's ignore the fact that they don't drive very well and that they steer terribly. And the fact is that they even explain it in one of the cutscenes. They talk about how some of the streets back in London were incredibly tight and that 2 or 3 carriages couldn't get by. You do notice that a couple times here. So it's sort of funny. You're given a carriage, and many, many times it turns into nothing more than a medieval battering ram with horses at the front. Real quickly, I just want to say, I really loved this scene. The violins, people dancing, look at that. Unity does, on horses for a second, I just was surprised at how well they actually ended up modeling them. They don't look perfectly right, but Red Dead probably still has the overall, award for best horses, even though now it's an older game, its textures don't look that good. But I still think the modeling of musculature across bone and stuff like that on the horses was really well done. However, I think that they've done a fairly good job here. When you pass by horses, if they stop anywhere where there's grass, you'll see them, looking around for food on the ground. That canter, I think that's a canter right there. I could be wrong on the different names of how a horse runs, but the different animations for the speed, all really, really well done. My family owns horses, so it's cool to sort of see that mimicked out. There's 2 guys there. Now, this is one area where there's a business exchange, and I love how you come out here and all these people are dressed in their finery. Walking through here. Guy almost got cleaned out. So, a comparison between Syndicate and Assassin's Creed Unity. I think that everybody obviously knows Assassin's Creed Unity has far larger groups of and crowds. Here's the plain and simple fact, though. I feel that Syndicate is far more realistic. Now, I get that there was a revolution going on in Unity, and so that's why you had those massive crowds. And that's great and everything. It was great in certain places, but they certainly, to me, overused it. Here you have this almost... It's just this different density of characters. This game technically still has some of those issues. You know, in the video you might see, and it's something I didn't see, but you might see the character dropping in from the sky. That kind of stuff does happen. But in the end, I still feel that Assassin's Creed Syndicate is a better technical piece than Assassin's Creed Unity is. Assassin's Creed Unity had one thing going for it, and that was large crowds. Here, they're realistic crowds, far more realistic. That's cool. The kid's bagging at the food stove. Another thing I love, we're getting down to the wharf here, which is one of my favorite areas in the game. This is just overall really incredible looking. The dirty brown sewer water. I mean, who would ever want to go in there? But you see that water bouncing off the poles. You see that it interacting with things. But one of the cool bits here that we're going to be able to see in a moment. Here, let me just verify I know where I am. Okay. One of the cool things is just how the entire world state changes when it comes to how they model things. Now you start seeing things like the coiled rope and stuff like that. And it's strange that you play other open world games, especially ones that are a little bit older, and they don't really understand the transition between, you know, a modern area to a rustic area, from a rustic area to industrial area. And Ubisoft nailed it in Syndicate. I don't know if it's because they went and studied London itself, and because a lot of London architecture still exists, where in some, you know, cities that they might want to try to recreate, a lot of these old places don't still exist. You know, they've been torn down. But very, very cool here. Also, I love all these posters. Everything just has a really lived-in feel to it. The snow. Look at that. I love just people going ape shit. Now, of course, this happens in GTA. One thing you always have to assume with any of these open world games, you have to assume some balance and acceptance of issues if they all have them, and they all do. GTA has these issues where cars go crazy. I remember in GTA 4, the first time I jumped up on top of a car, and in Saints Row, that, you know, the character in the car goes completely batshit insane and absolutely does anything to get away from you, including killing themselves. That kind of stuff happens here. I love this transition under bridges. The architecture within London anyway is really, really interesting. So that's fun all by itself. But how they did stuff like the debris on the right and left here, and even the propagation of vegetation and foliage is all done fairly right, where most of the thoroughfares are pretty much free of it. But on the edges, see, on the edges here, there's always just a little bit, and I find that really, really intriguing. From an artistic standpoint, they've done incredibly well. Stealth kill messenger. I don't know about you guys, I always find that particular mission, or that particular event, difficult to do. I usually can't kill them stealthily. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here, we're going to pass over the bridge. Passing over the bridge, I think, allows for one of the really cool looks at this game, when you can look down on the water and you can see those ships going by. I think a lot of people had a question in their minds. Would Assassin's Creed be able to move into at least a slightly more modern age and still be enjoyable and still sort of feel like an Assassin's Creed game? And I think that they nailed it. I think they nailed that Gangs of New York style feel. I think they nailed the gang fighting, the gang hideouts. I think they nailed that. They nailed the carriages, the horse-drawn carriages. They didn't nail the transportation itself. Moving from area to area on those, you know, horse-drawn carriages can be a little bit cumbersome. They don't steer the best. There's various issues there. But as you're walking, I think it's really hard to not be really impressed by what we're seeing here. Now, I'm just going to be quiet for a little bit, and we'll just listen to some of the ambient sounds as we cross this bridge. So I've always been fairly surprised by how well the audio is mimicked in games like this, the Assassin's Creed games, but I find that Syndicate does it almost better than the rest, including if you guys listen, there's two tones to the wind. There's wind going over the bridge and wind going under the bridge. And I find that really incredible that they actually, at least fairly well, modeled that. Additionally, you of course have all of the different sounds of the boats and their horns and stuff like that. But the seabirds, all of that kind of stuff is really mimicked very well. And audio-wise, oh, hey, might as well grab that. Audio-wise, I think they did just a spectacular job. Now, up close, we're seeing the textures. It's strange because in-game versus actual cutscene textures are obviously different. I find that the in-game textures look really good in some particular camera views, and in others they don't. That one didn't look very good. When it zoomed in and it showed his face, he looked like a fairly low polygon, fairly low texture resolution character. But here, he looks okay from far away. And of course, from behind, everything from his, the finery that he's wearing, the cool gauntlet that I've got finally, looks very cool. Now, a lot of people were complaining about the PC version. If you guys realized and have watched, you've noticed that it appears as if his cape is running at half the frame rate update as the game itself. And that is true. So if you have it locked at 60, it's going to run at 30. And there's been reports that if you run the game at 30 and lock it, the cloth runs at 15. Now, here's the thing. Though I know it bothers people, I absolutely get why they did it. Number one, it's a cloth physics, which might actually mess up their, it might be something that was hard on their, on the engine, and they thought, oh, well, we'll just, it's a big thing, it's right in the center of the picture, we'll lower that frame rate. But also, for many people, it's actually going to look a little bit more realistic. There's something almost slower and more billowing about it. Obviously, it is slower because it's refreshing at half the speed. People like myself will notice that, but many people won't. And I've heard multiple people who've played the game be like, man, it's, the way his cloth moves and stuff like that, it looks just so real and so billowy, not really realizing that it's running at half the refresh rate of the actual game itself. This is something we've seen mimicked multiple times. For example, Halo 5's enemies far away refresh at 30 frames per second, but the actual up-close enemies refresh at 60 frames per second. You will notice those differences depending on what you pay attention to. It's not something that's brand new for this title. It's something that I think we're going to see a lot of titles start to do here as the jump to 60 frames per second, or people wanting 60 frames per second, continues. I love the textures on the ground here. All very good, very depthy. There's a very cool feeling of depth here. I love walking in. The pubs look so great. I really wish there was a lot more you could do here, but that soft yellow light coming through, that's just so well done. Whistling. Okay, we'll keep moving. So, as a walking the walk, what I decided to do is basically walk through from one corner of this area to the other and see, number one, how long it takes, and number two, the separation of church and state, as I like to call it. The separation of different boroughs within the city and how they're really mimicked. And if that separation is instant or if it's gradual. I think gradual separation of two different boroughs makes more sense. It just feels far more organic.
One wrong move and you'll never see anything like them again.
There you go. There's a risque comment. That's great. This kid kicking the ball. First time I saw this, I was really impressed by the overall just look of it. Now, most of the time, the kid and the collision detection here with this model is fairly on. A little, at full speed, it's not like there. You see a couple times where he doesn't hit it, but then you start noticing that's really well done. Looks really cool. He resets and does a different set of animations. So what they've done is they've mixed in at least 2 or 3 that can then run at different speeds and at different in a different cycle, which makes that feel almost even more random. They didn't basically randomize every animation. They probably had 20, 30 different kick animations per cycle. They had 3, and then those go in a random order. Very cool. Awesome. goes the weasel. Okay, now we're coming up. You can see in front of us the industry area. Go ahead and sort of see the transition. Now, we start to see repetitive characters. Here's two that are walking the same. In the industrial area, I noticed this far more than in other areas. And I think there's two reasons why. One, because I feel that they've given them very unique walking animations. For example, there's this one character in particular that trudges. Oh, there he is right there. There's one where they trudge and they sort of walk very unhappily. See there to our right, front right, you see two guys following each other. It's the exact same animation. I think what happens when you have such an overblown animation, it's almost like anything that's overblown. You notice it, and if it continues, you notice it even more. And if it's repeated, it's instantly noticeable. And here's a guy coming and two dudes going the other way, and they're all doing the same animation, though two of them look different than the third. So when it comes down to it, I think that in the industrial areas, you notice that repetition more so than you do in the other areas, because in the other areas, those walks are far less defined, far less of that trudgy, overblown, I'm tired walk, and it's so instantly noticeable. And it just happens a lot here in the industrial areas. I love coming into places like this, though. I don't know what this is. Looks like some kind of winery. Guys with his checkboard, another dude polishing the side of that barrel, cleaning it, and then somebody else just investigating the wares. It's such a really great feel. Let's just walk down here. See if we can hear him.
So, you admit it then? You're a brute who beats people over small sums.
It's honest work.
Your definition of honest.
You don't want to pay? That's your decision. Only yourself to blame if something nasty happens.
Well, the situation is rather embarrassing, but I'm afraid I won't have the money for you in time.
Huh. One of those mafia moments, as I call them here in this game. One of the things I do notice a lot of times is they've done a really good job mimicking the animation with whatever they say, including the fact that at times they have the same animation being used for two different discussions, let's say. So you sort of have the criminal underworld discussions and arguments that might be repeated. Those animations might be repeated across 3 or 4 different conversations, but strangely enough, and this really speaks to, I guess, a height of the ability to be critical of what your title shows. They've gone through and made sure that the narrative fits what those guys are saying, even if they're using the same animation, which is pretty rare. So you don't often in this title get characters doing something where their animation doesn't somewhat subtly connect with what they're saying or what they're supposed to be doing or who they're supposed to be at that particular time. Just the lighting, the reflection off the glass. They do such a good job with all of the scattering of light effects off glass here to really give it that old style opaque. Because remember, back then, I mean, glass work, stuff like that, it wasn't the clear, transparent glass we're accustomed to. And there were impurities at times and stuff like that. And I love the fact that when you cross in front of some of the old buildings, they show those impurities within the glass. Very, very cool. One thing I wasn't really happy with is I liked the look of the water here, but the little splashes by his feet, I don't know. They look like that typical particle effect you see in other games where it's just really cheesily done. Now here is a rural area that's actually within the industrial area, and I think this is well done. They did a really good job of sort of capturing what it's like when a city is built up, industrial parts of the city is built up around a rural part, and the collapsing and the overall just destruction of the rural areas, including all of the vice that occurs there. But more importantly, at least to me right now, is just you can see like the grass and the toughs still trying to live with, you know, the heavy footwork and the large amount of people walking by. And this is not, I don't think this is a bad level of characters within a game right now. You do see some repeats. You certainly see some animations repeating. But I think as a whole, this actually is done very, very well. It's not up to Unity's standards. But when it comes down to it, it also doesn't have all of the problems Unity still has, even after multiple patches.
What are those brigands up to now? There's no benefit to my being something strange going on.
Now, any frame rate judder you guys might see during the recording of this, it is solely up to the actual recording software itself. I'm using OBS, but it is not, do not think that that's a part of the actual game itself. I'm getting way above 30 frames per second, but occasionally I'm seeing a stutter in the video that I'm watching as it's being recorded. Usually that occurs when the game is, you know, it's writing to the same disk or something like that, so you'll see that occasional judder, but it's well above 30. Here's some other really good examples of ambient occlusion. Now, one thing you will hear me talk about, and so I'll just sort of discuss it here in another technical discussion for a second, is PCSS. Now, PCSS is called percentage closer soft shadows. The easiest way to describe what that is it's a shadowing technology that allows for more accuracy in shadows. If you look at something shadow inherently in the world, they are sharper at the base of whatever that item is, and then they blur farther out away from the base of that item because of the way light propagates. Well, basically PCSS sort of does that. It's a software solution, or a software written, I guess, what you would call mathematical calculation that goes out there and it figures that out. The only problem is it's a frame rate killer. If you go from high shadowing in this game and then you turn on PCSS or PCSS Plus, you are looking at minimum 15 to 20 frames per second lost. So a little bit like I discussed earlier with HBAO, where they found a new way to do ambient occlusion. My hope is that this percentage closer soft shadows, somebody figures out a way to sort of, you know, figure out a quicker way to do this, rewrites that software, because it really does add realism to the picture. I mean, that is exactly what happens. It is how shadows work. Ooh. Sorry about that. We got a little bit of a graphic issue there on the recorder, I noticed. But it's something that I like to have turned on, PCSS. I didn't go with PCSS Plus because I could barely notice a difference. Even high looks fine in this game to me, the normal shadowing that they do. But when it comes down to it, well, it's nice to have it on. Just looking at this bush here. The shadowing within the bush is actually done somewhat fairly well, you know, as well here. Now, if you also notice, if you look closely, you can see that at times to save frame rate, it looks like the shadows are basically updated at a slower speed than the rest of the game. It doesn't happen all the time. It looks like it's some type of frame rate saving device that they have programmed in. But at times you'll see the shadows updating at the same frame rate as the game, and then at other times it looks like they're updating a little slower, probably half speed like the cape. I love this. Just this look here. Such a great location. One of my favorite locations in the game is this one particular walkway. I don't know why. It's so interesting to the eye.
Nice one.
Yeah, there you saw the shadows updating slower too. We are getting a little bit of a frame rate hit. Excuse me. Now, what I think is really nice is because of the different shadowing that we have going on, even far away objects have some depth to them. This is a really good place to where you can sort of get the what HBAO and PCSS really do when it comes to shadowing and giving depth to different items. You can see that far off railway, the side of the railway sort of still popping out, which is because it's on. If it was off, it would look flat. There wouldn't even be a shadow on it. Same thing with shadow distance.
They'll give anyone a badge these days. Want to see what I can do?
Now, if you noticed, I'm high enough level, I can't remember the skill, but I'm high enough level that I can stop gang members from trying to attack me. That's why I waited for a while to do the video, till I could play the PC version up to this point. You know, that is really cool. It's like a picture of a homestead. You got the kids, the two people over at the fire burn barrel, and the chickens. Like, it almost looks like they're trying to show you what a family without a home would look like. And that is so great. There's something so artistically valid about what they just showed. It reminds me of pictures in the past or paintings that a painter would do of a family. And that was such a great picture.
Give me the news.
For you, Chief.
Thank you. Of course, those are the runners that you can get if you have a particular skill set. So we're just going to continue walking here. Like I said, if you don't want to see this, that's fine. But I'm going to walk pretty much from one end to the other and then cross over. So far, I haven't got to one end yet. If you run, you would obviously go a little faster, but I don't really feel like this. Who's she not happy with? My characters or their police over there?
Your days are numbered. The revolution's coming, and you'll be burnt to ash.
Now, when it comes to errors, the only real errors I've seen so far, of course, you have the atypical animation errors that occur in characters that are far away. I have noticed that on steep inclines, if I'm looking down and then look up, I've watched the game drop in NPCs at the top of the hill, like some kind of strange entity dropper, where like you'll see a character drop from 6 or 7 feet down onto the pavement, where they're added into the game, where the game didn't think I was looking or something like that. But overall, there's still fairly few overall mistakes, when again, considering typical open world. What are we doing here? I've never been to this area. Well, cricket, right? Jeez, that's pretty sweet. So many activities, so many, whether it be group, whether it be single entity activities, there's just so many. And I love that overall feel of things being alive within this world. The characters, the animations. What's he doing? Tapping something there in the dirt. Little butterfly. Just a lot of real cool ads here. Also, it's strange to me that Syndicate, I feel, does a better job than GTA 5 when it comes to foliage and its spread and growth across different rocky areas. That game had a lot of jank, and Assassin's Creed Syndicate, for the most part, has 3D items over the top of textures, so you don't get that flat texture indicating grass. You actually get full grass. Now, you do see it draw in. We just saw it draw in there. But it still looks more realistic, I think, than GTA 5, which, of course, obviously you have a difference in age there in the game. Jump over here. Down. I think it's easy to point at Syndicate and assume that there's less of a variation here than in some of the other areas. I don't think that Unity had much of a variation, but obviously Assassin's Creed 3 did. And really, when you think about it, Black Flag did, but Black Flag obviously did because you're a pirate, so you were in the water or not. So just looking at where I am. But when it comes down to it, there's a subtleness. You have to really look close, but there's just so many different things going on and a lived-in feel in Syndicate that I think trumps those games. And really surprised me, and I think, talking to other reviewers, it's one of the first things they all mentioned to me when we talked. They were like, wow, this is the first time where the world just seems to pop when it comes to its liveliness, when it comes to its variation. It's a more subtle variation. It's not so in your face as riding your horse out in the snow and then, going to a major city and, let's say, Assassin's Creed 3, or, being in a ship, doing ship battles, and then suddenly, out in paradise when it comes to Black Flag. It's all in that city, of course. But there's something about the variation that I think is just really, really interesting. That horse looked back at me. That was awesome. He's like, what are you doing? Another thing you'll notice in Syndicate is there's almost no flat texturing at all. Almost every single thing, whether it be a normal road or an old thoroughfare, every single area has an incredible amount of texture to it. Yeah, let's hitch a ride. Heading towards Big Ben. Now, I've conquered a lot of places, got 100% on a lot of these locations, so you'll notice that popping up. Luckily, that stops us from getting attacked, too, as well as my skill. Look at that. I mean, even the farther away places have... Their shadow distance is done fairly well. Now, of course, you can adjust this in the PC version with the console versions, probably around the medium setting. I mean, they even... It's so cool because they even trade places in the roadway accurately. Like, they just sort of go from the slow lane to the somewhat slow lane. And it looks right. There you get to see the different horses' speeds. 1, 2, 3. There's 4 horse models. Plus, I know there's a white one. I would assume there's 6 to 8 horse models. Which isn't bad when you consider that there's a good amount of mixing and matching. Looking for some pop in here to see if there's any. There's a little bit of pop in. Shadow here and there, as well as it looked like some pop in on some carriages. Not bad though. Oh, there was some pop in on that foliage there. Looks like we're stuck behind this police. Yeah, time for me to get out. If I could walk faster, then it's going. Oh, of course, and then he picks up the speed. Oh, there's another one. So there's the gray horses. So that's, yeah, there's at least 8 or 9 horse models, which is pretty cool. It does, you know, that helps out. Anything like that helps out in the variation and the overall feeling of variability that occurs within the world. Now here, we're entering into, of course, the nicer section of town. So what we're going to start seeing is far more parks, actual scenic parks, and less of the seedier, seamier underside of life, which I think is really cool. They did a good job of that separation. And it occurs fairly slowly, usually with the bridge here, with that, you know, transportation from lower class to upper class. But here we go into the upper class. This is what an upper class park looks like here. I think they do a fairly good job. One thing I noticed in the upper class parks that does not exist in the lower class parks, and this could have to do with, and somebody who, you know, studies history, I would love to hear if this is on purpose, but in the lower class parks, there's far less activities of any kind going on. Now, that might be because maybe, you know, the upper class people didn't, you know, basically exercise or do anything that the, you know, unwashed masses would do. That might totally be a valid thing. But I noticed in the lower class parks, there's everything from cricket to people kicking a ball to kids playing chase. Here's some kids playing chase, actually. And there's the kid with the ball. Okay, so you're getting those things. But they're not mixed in with the highfalutin, you know, characters. And I'm wondering if that was a historical thing. It seems more just stand around and talk. And unfortunately, at times, that can appear a little bit unrealistic. Love this. Just university grounds. It's so great looking. Monolithic. Even though I was blown away the first time I saw this and I realized that nobody had shorn the grass at all, it hasn't been cut, which surprised me. I love the photographers taking pictures. So cool looking. I've never seen one successfully take a picture, by the way. Never. They always attempt to. You know, I certainly can see why people would say something along the lines of that it does feel like a lot of the places look the same. I do get that. I mean, I can personally see that myself, but for me, I just feel that though areas may at times look like other areas within this game, it's just that sort of dexterity that Ubisoft has shown with this particular game in slightly putting in small differences between them that is just more enjoyable to me, again, than, as I said before in the past in this video, that a more exuberant change that you might see in other titles. I mean, I get it. I do. I know a lot of people are probably watching this going like, well, you know, it all sort of looks the same. I feel that that's, in all honesty, much more realistic. That is the way some towns look. But when you really look at it as a whole and you start identifying the different characters, what people are doing, even the road textures change, I think that there is a difference, and it's a game that is it's all in one smaller contained area. But I think that they did just such a spectacular job with that contained area that, to me, it's not bothersome. To me, it actually, I really like to see how they sort of went in and attempted and tried their hardest to make sure that an area that might be complained about as looking somewhat the same still has some differences. And it's so strange because I've played this game enough now that no matter where I go in the world, I almost always know fairly where I am just by how the world is set up, how things are done. And I think that that's really cool because I can't say that was always that way in past Assassin's Creed games. Many times I could still get lost regardless of how long I went because I felt that they actually looked far more the same within their smaller areas. So they may have looked different area to area, but once you got in there, it was much more difficult to sort of identify exactly where you were. And there was something about it that just seemed fairly brusque, fairly blunt in the way they went about it. Yeah, I could just walk around here for hours and just explore, but you guys know me, I do that anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We're now at over 45 minutes, and we have got, it took us about 30-something to get from one end to the other at a walk, and we weren't even close, actually, to the very lower bottom of it. We weren't really going diagonal. Now we've gone across another bridge, and it's even though it is a smaller world than I think other Assassin's Creed games are, there's a secret that I can't tell you guys about. I will just say there is another area. I'm not going to say what it is, but I think that it's worth not mentioning for those people who haven't got to that location yet. But I think that still, despite it being a slightly small area, it's just jam-packed with details, and at the very least is super, super interesting. The park to the right's having a big party. So anyway, that's it for me. Very, very cool area. I'm really enjoying Syndicate. As you guys can tell, I think it's one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games. I'm really happy that it's doing well by the critics. Yeah, so here we are. We went up from the top here down to right about there and across. Yeah. So anyway, I really enjoyed this. I hope you guys enjoyed this sort of walkthrough, even if you just want to turn the sound off so you don't have to hear me talk and you can just see the world itself. Peace out.